It is the week 3 spotlight. Spotlight videos are where we take a deeper dive into a player, or in some cases, a concept or a scheme that we think is super interesting from the 49ers previous week game. This week, we're actually not going to take a look at a player. Last week, we took a look at Kella Witherspoon and his performance, so definitely take a look at that if you have not yet. This week, we're actually going to take a look at a scheme as opposed to a player. It's a really interesting scheme that the 49ers have put on film the last couple of weeks, and it's an adjustment to their fire zone blitz. It's called Kings. We're going to take a look at 3 plays today that is the Kings adjustment to the fire zone, and we'll walk you through what it looks like. We'll walk through what a traditional fire zone looks like and how it was effective against the New York Football Giants. First, David, let's talk through what a regular fire zone is, because I think it's helpful to know what that is before we get into the adjustment that is the Kings.
Absolutely. So let's get to kind of a better point here. Pre-snap. Perfect. Okay. So yeah, if you remember back, if you listen to the scheme on stuff, fire zone is going to be kind of a zone blitz where you have 3 deep defenders and 3 underneath defenders. We kind of more alluded to it, in scheme month. We didn't really dive deep into it, but it's a very match heavy scheme. So because you're removing one of the potential pass coverage players and you're making him a pass rusher, you want to make sure that you don't have, everything's a little bit more spread out, right? If you were just kind of drop into standard zones, there would be a lot of space there, and it would be pretty easy for offenses to be able to kind of pick you apart and find receivers in that open space. So what you end up doing a lot of is kind of getting guys matching to specific receivers. And so what you're going to get in a typical fire zone is those 3 underneath defenders. You're going to have, say, one here with Quan Alexander. He's going to be what's called a skiff player. So it's kind of that curl flat roll in your typical, cover 3, where he would kind of get out to this area, run to the flat late. But it adds a responsibility to his plate, and that first he's going to protect anything up the seam. So if this guy runs vertical at all, he's going to carry that, because we know that if he doesn't, we don't have enough players basically to defend all that stuff. So you're going to have one of those players on each side of the field. So you have one here, one to the opposite side. And then your middle underneath defender is going to be what's usually called a hole player. His key is going to be on the number 3 receiver. So you just kind of, if you look at the 5 eligible receivers they have, one side is bound to have 3 in most cases. So it's that inside most receiver in trips in this case. So you count outside in 1, 2, 3. And that's going to be his key in. So he's basically trying to find whoever ends up being the final number 3 receiver. And that just meaning like after the route distribution. So if he runs vertical in this case, he comes inside. This guy, even though he started as the number 2 receiver, he becomes the final number 3 because he's the inside most guy after the route distributes. So that's kind of how your basic fire zone structure typically works.
Yeah, so the key things to remember about a fire zone is that you are rushing 5, and because you're rushing 5, that means you have 1 fewer person in coverage, and that means you've got 6, which traditionally means you split them up into 3 deep and 3 under. And you've got 2 skiff players, which stands for seam, curl, flat, SCF. Again, defensive coaches, not the most imaginative. It's just the responsibility, seam, curl, flat in that order. And then those letters look like skiff. So we're going to call them skiff players.
Easy enough.
And then you've got 1 in the middle hole and 5 rushers. Now with the Kings call, this is a specific call that's an adjustment to 3-by-1 sets, 3 wide receivers to one side and 1 isolated wide receiver to the other, when the running back is to the weak side. That's exactly what you see the Giants in here. You see 1, 2, 3 over here to the bottom of the screen. And then you've got your weak side of the formation with the single receiver and the running back aligned to that side. In these instances, and when the 49ers see 3-by-1 with the running back to the weak side, they adjust their fire zone to Kings, and they run a couple of special things that almost always gets them a guaranteed free rusher.
And the other key part of that too is actually the location of the ball. So we want this formational look, but we also want the ball either in the middle of the field. So I've got kind of roughly equal distance to either side, or we want the trips to be to the wide side of the field. So if the ball was on this left hash here, that would mean that the trips over to the right would be to the field or the wider side. And then, of course, you would have the boundary would be the opposite side there. So we want the trips to the field the back offset to the weak side into the boundary. And that's going to be the criteria for this King's Call. And so effectively what they do is, again, remember I would have my one skiff player over here. It's hard to tell since they both ultimately blitz, but it would be either Jimmy Ward or Quan Alexander here are my two options who could potentially fill that role. So one of those guys would normally be your skiff player into the boundary, but what they're going to do instead is try to get an extra man into the pass rush. And so they feel like when the back is offset here and they blitz another rusher that side, it's going to be easier to keep the back into protection, because ultimately, say they ran their normal kind of basic fire zone and the back goes out for a pass, this guy's going to follow him. He's going to match to that, to the back, and he's essentially going to play it in man coverage. So if they can force him, being the back, to stay into pass protect, they can get another rusher into the rush and have a chance to really, get some pressure on the quarterback and force him into a quick throw.
And that's exactly what happens here. You look oftentimes what the running back has to do, and sometimes in this case they'll have a check release, and it's basically check to see if someone's coming, and if not, then release. But if they're blitzing both players to that weak side, then the running back stays in, you send one more than they can block, and you've got a free rusher. And that's exactly what happens here. You've got Daniel Jones who throws it to Verrett, or throws it out of bounds, really, but to Verrett's man, and it's an easy incomplete. Let's go to the next play and see this develop once more, because it happens again. That first play was third down. This is going to be second down, and you see the exact same alignment. So let's go ahead and take a look at three wide receivers to the wide side of the field, the back aligned weak side. The Niners are going to go into a fire zone blitz. They're going to send two blitzers down that weak side and get a free rusher.
Yep. So I get, again, it's Jimmy Ward and Quan Alexander that are over there. That one of them would be my skiff player over into the boundary, but we're going to bring both those guys and, be able to get essentially one of them free, Jimmy Ward coming free again and able to force a quick throw. And if we look at, just kind of how these underneath guys match as well, didn't talk about that as much on the last one, but you can really see, so my outside corners, and this is definitely true of the single receiver side, he's going to man up. The 49ers like to have this guy man up as well. And so that takes care of, basically two of my, what would be deep defenders. But you can see Quan Alexander, he's going to look at that number two receiver. He's going to match him vertically. And then it's Warner who's going to open up, try to find the number three receiver and get to him. You'll notice that Warner is a little bit late here in how he opens up. See how he kind of like basically is facing the sideline. He really wants to wall anything. So his kind of primary concern is going to be anything coming inside or anything going vertical up the seam. So that's kind of what he has to be on guard against to begin with, is like his primary focus. And so he really, if he gets either of those options, he wants to be able to wall that off and completely take it away. So they'll settle with, if they're going to do a quick outbreaking route like that, I've got extra defenders over here who can help bring a tackle. Like they'll settle for kind of leaving that a little bit open and rallying to it late. So that's kind of why you see him a couple steps behind here. But ultimately we get, again, the pressure that forces the quick throw. It's an off-target throw again, leaves it kind of behind on the receiver's back hip, and that allows Dante Johnson to get in there and knock it down.
Another play where the Niners are trying to manufacture pressure, this time on second down, but now we get back to third down, which is going to be Robert Saleh's seemingly blitz-heavy down, and you see the same thing happening again. This one looks a little different because you start out with that motion, and you've got a little short set, but it's still three receivers to the wide side of the field. You have that weak side aligned running back, and now you're going to see two blitzers coming off, and you're still going to have a three deep, three under fire zone, which starts out looking different. You see Tart kind of dropping back into the middle of the field. It starts one way, they disguise it, they rotate their safeties, and now you have a different pre-snap look, but the end result is exactly the same. Three deep defenders, three underneath guys that are matching. You even see Warner's technique looks exactly the same, where he opens up, walls off, and starts running, and ultimately it's an incomplete pass. But even if it was complete, you can see they're okay with giving that up because you've got three defenders there that can rally to the ball. Had he continued to go the other way, there's a bunch of space open there, and that's not where you want to funnel the route concepts, or not where you want to funnel the player. But ultimately, it's another incomplete pass. It's another pass that was rushed, and another successful King's Call.
Yep. So, and that's a great point as far as like the available space, right? So remember, this guy over to the single receiver side, this corner is manned up. So he's not getting eyes back to the quarterback or to what else is happening on the play at all. So if you get beat inside, I mean, there's just no help here, right? There's just nothing but space, especially you got the safety that's rotating away from that area. So you're just kind of asking for trouble if you give that up. So that's why it's such a big focus for Warner coming. I got to find that number 3 receiver, wall him off, and if he wants to break outside for something short, then that's fine. We can rally and make a tackle over there. But ultimately, like as you see, if they're going to do something like that, if it's not immediate, the pressure is going to get there, right? So from this look, you can only really keep 6 in to block as an offense, and that's how many we're bringing. And so if you disguise it well enough and you're bringing them from the right places, it's not going to be terribly difficult to be able to get one of those rushers free. And like we saw it on 3 different plays here. They were successful on every single one of them because it was something that they did show last week, and we thought about talking about last week. But the Jets, every time they got into that look, they ended up just throwing a screen, and so it was kind of boring. There wasn't a lot to really talk about there. So was exciting to see them come back to that look in some really critical situations. A few third downs here and get some stops and have a lot of success with that scheme.
So it's the King's call, an adjustment to fire zone. That's the spotlight this week. You can definitely impress your friends. See what happens if on game day you see 3 wide receivers lined up in a 3-by-1 over to the field side, and you've got that running back aligned weak, and see if they send blitzers and pressure in fire zone. See if you can recognize it on tape, and make sure you tweet us if you do. Thanks again for tuning in to this week's Spotlight, and as always, go Niners.